Bolts that can destroy entire universes. Weapons with no upper limit to their power. Batteries capable of powering entire armies and full civilizations. Across the history of Magic the Gathering, there are some truly disgusting objects. Artifacts that are stronger than any planeswalker, any legendary creature, and sometimes even more powerful than entire planes themselves. And so today I wanted to try something a little bit different and dig into a bunch of them, starting with maybe the coolest artifact vehicle in Magic the Gathering, the Weatherlight. The Weatherlight is far more than just a flying ship. It's a super sick, super fast flying ship that can also just cross the fabric of the multiverse and hop planes themselves. This thing is one of the most central components of Urza's legacy, an incredible collection of artifacts designed to defeat the original Phyrexian invasion, led by none other than Yawgmoth. In case you don't know, he's a physician, a Thran physician who was once kind of like a human, but also now a scary wall of meat and machine. Back to the Weatherlight though, it was originally constructed under the guidance of Master Artificer and Worst Stat of the Year, Urza, and the ship was built using ancient Thran technology as well. It was actually designed to house multiple interlocking artifacts, the legacy itself, but on its own, it may just be one of the most single powerful weapons in the entire legacy as well. And that's because of its power source, something that truly elevates the Weatherlight beyond just a standard artifact vehicle like I don't know, Dermotaxi here. Nothing against Dermotaxi, but you get it, right? At its core, the Weatherlight was fueled by a power stone infused with the entire essence of Serra's realm, a now destroyed artificial plane created by the planeswalker Serra. Now, if you've watched my Urza video, you already know this, but Urza kind of did her and the entire plane very dirty and then turned it into a super fancy engine for his own airship, which then effectively allows the Weatherlight to run on the remains of an entire plane and its entire mana. That's of course what grants it its most iconic ability as well, interplanar travel, something incredibly rare for non-planeswalkers, especially during that specific era of Magic the Gathering. Also, since we're speaking about it being powered by a power stone, we should probably also talk about the strong and weak stones. Also just casually called the Power Stones when they were paired, these rocks are among the strongest objects in all of Magic's lore. The Strong and Weak Stones were first a part of the ancient Thran legacy, insane power sources that caused an entire civil war. Eventually, these were rediscovered by Urza and his brother Mishra and caused yet another civil war, in this case, the Brothers' War. There was an entire set around it. Now, these stones are not just AA batteries, they're like D batteries, those big boy thingies. They are dense concentrations of magical energy capable of fueling truly gigantic machines, constructs, and again, entire civilizations. Just a single stone like this can power entire armies, as seen during Mishra's and Urza's little brotherly bout that lasted for a couple of years, and what makes the Power Stones especially significant to the legacy is their connection to Urza himself. After the catastrophic explosion of an even more powerful item that we'll talk about later in this video, these two stones became embedded in Urza's own eyes, effectively transforming him into something beyond just human, an uber-powerful planeswalker, artificer, god, man kind of thing. And within the legacy framework, Power Stones act as fuel for pretty much everything else. The Weatherlight, Karn, and numerous other constructs rely on these stones for their energy. Without them, the entire system would just collapse. Surprisingly enough though, technically they're not the only Power Stones that are a part of the legacy. The Bones of Ramos. These broken bones belong to the mighty Ramos dragon engine, who honestly may just deserve a whole spot on this list by himself, but I also think he's full of so much more lore, and I'd almost just rather make a whole video on him later at some point if you're interested. Let me know in the comments. But for now, I'll give you a brief overview of him in regard to the creation of some other uber powerful relics surrounding him. This guy here is a construct originally created by old Phyrexia and then a weapon of Mishra, who was built to hunt humans, before then being saved and reprogrammed by Urza to instead protect the little bitty humans. You know, kind of a little redemption arc for him. Now, during the climactic finale of the Brothers' War, Ramos was sent hurtling across different planes while carrying a group of human and merfolk survivors. Clutch, homie. Pretty nice. In a desperate attempt to save them, Ramos travels through a hidden portal to Mercadia. However, his arrival there triggers his own massive explosion, something that kills countless native inhabitants of the plane. As a result, Ramos's brain was very sad, and as we all know, when your brain is sad, your will fractures, and naturally, like all of us, right, his body broke off 5 parts, forming the artifacts known as the Bones of Ramos, each representing 1 color of mana. And these crystalline remnants represent both his immense power and also the collapse of his own identity. After recovering later, Ramos actually gathers these fragments back up and builds the Temple of Oramos, where the bones then become focal points of reverence and lingering energy. Something that the captain of the Weatherlight and genetically perfect human being, Gerard Capuchin, actually needed in order to complete the legacy weapon. And unlike many other artifacts on this list, the Bones of Ramos were not actually weapons, but 5 super strong power sources, arguably unlike anything else that exists in Magic lore, and an essential part of the legacy, almost as essential as my man, the artifact who turned into a god, Karn. Karn here is the culmination of the legacy itself. Created by Urza as a silver golem, Karn was not simply another construct, he was designed to be the final essential component in Urza's entire giant plan. Unlike most artifacts, Karn possesses true sentience, moral awareness, and the capacity for independent and creative thought, thanks to his Phyrexian heart. This real boy here is immune to time travel's insane effects on the body. Don't ask me why silver specifically is immune to time travel wear and tear. It just is in Magic, and after detonating the legacy, Karn was infused with Urza's own Planeswalker spark, ascending him to Planeswalker Karn, who it turns out I also have a whole video on that goes into way more details of the insane scale of his absolutely godly power, but what you need to know for this video is that he is the living legacy of the legacy, and one of the most powerful planeswalkers in Magic, period. Something we can actually very easily see when he creates the entire plane of Argentum, which eventually then becomes Mirrodin, which eventually becomes New Phyrexia. And that's thanks to the next artifact that we need to discuss on our list, our first artifact in the, multiverse-altering category here, Mirari and Memnarch. The Mirari is one of the most deceptively dangerous artifacts in all of Magic's history. Originally created by Karn as a probe to study mana and the nature of planes themselves, it very quickly proved to be far more volatile than intended, thanks to its low-key super broken wish-granting magic abilities. You see, the Mirari here has the ability to amplify thoughts, desires, and spells into reality, effectively turning imagination into power itself. Basically Gear 5 in a ball for all my One Piece heads out there watching. However, it does so without any restraint, magnifying not just intent, but also obsession, greed, and ambition, right? 2 sides of the same coin. And it's kind of treated as a sort of monkey paw, like causing great change, but also at the cost of the user in some way, shape, or form. Finally recognizing that very danger, Karn later repurposed the Mirari into a new form, Memnarch, a sentient being tasked with overseeing the entire artificial plane of Argentum. And in this transformation, the Mirari then evolves from a sort of chaos amplifier into something honestly arguably even more dangerous, a self-aware kid with a dad who abandoned it. But that's okay, Papa went to get some cigarettes and milk from Dominaria, so Memnarch will follow. He just really needed a planeswalker spark. So the artifact then started developing this obsession with acquiring a spark, abducting many beings from across the multiverse in a desperate attempt to understand and try and replicate that very power. This actually makes the Mirari/Memnarch one of the clearest examples of an artifact that doesn't just alter reality, but actively one that manipulates it with a will of its own. And would you believe me if I told you that there's another lost child artifact of mass destruction out there too? Well, there is, and his name is Realmbreaker. Realmbreaker, who has popped up on this channel a bunch before as well, is a direct evolution of the new Phyrexian ambition, functioning as a multiversal invasion tree capable of connecting countless different planes simultaneously through its evil root system. It was created by the hottie of the year, Alish Norn, by using a seedling of the world tree that exists on Kaldheim. That's kind of the Nordic plane of MTG. And what makes this giant machine tree so scary is that it can literally shred through the blind eternities with its root, physically linking planes that are normally separated by impossible distances. Which, if you know anything about Magic, is crazy scary and crazy powerful because, as I mentioned earlier with the Weatherlight already, only planeswalkers, which make like a minuscule amount of the total population of the Magic multiverse, only those guys are actually meant to travel between planes completely freely. In the past, there were really only small and some quick ways to travel the multiverse for anyone else, but Realmbreaker is absolutely different. By creating stable, physical pathways between the planes, Realmbreaker allows entire armies, specifically, the Phyrexian forces, to invade multiple planes at once, tying them all to New Phyrexia. Effectively, Realmbreaker turns the multiverse into a connected battlefield, and whoever wields it is a master general capable of conquering the multiverse and reality itself. Now, that's terrifying, but a massive target that was able to get pinned down by our resident flaming hot tree lady Ren, which is even more terrifying. There also is, however, a much more pointed version of this type of power too. The Planar Bridge. It was originally created on Avishkar and later weaponized by the evil man who no one really likes, not even his own allies, Tezzeret. Unlike Realmbreaker, which creates permanent connections, the Planar Bridge functions more like a targeted gateway, pulling objects or beings from one plane into another. However, this process is extremely dangerous and organic matter does not naturally just survive this transition, and this limitation initially kind of restricts its use pretty badly, but Tezzeret circumvents this by integrating the bridge into his own Ethereum-enhanced body, effectively becoming a living conduit for interplanar transport, which, I gotta hand to him, is pretty cool. He now looks like a bit of a scary Iron Man and does a bunch of evil stuff with it in Edge of Eternity, right on the edges of reality itself. Is it as flashy as Realmbreaker? No. Is it just as scary because one of the evil guys still can use it right now? Absolutely. But at this point, I think enough about space bending. I want to now talk about a different fundamental force of Magic that's even scarier, I think, than just space: time. Which now leads me to the Temporal Anchor. The Temporal Anchor represents a different type of multiversal threat, the Dialga kind, not Palkia. This artifact here is closely associated with Teferi and all of his time magic shenanigans. Now, to be clear, it is not in fact a time machine. Instead, its primary function is to anchor a point in time, preventing it from drifting or collapsing due to, some magical interference. This becomes especially important when dealing with phased-out objects, you know about them, Teferi's protection, right? Lost timelines or unstable temporal events. Basically, by fixing these moments in place, the Temporal Anchor allows individuals to observe, interact with, and sometimes even influence events that exist outside the normal time flow. Essentially, it's just kind of like tying yourself to a tree before scaling off a cliff, but if the tree was the present and the cliff was time travel, You get it, right? Why is that thing so powerful? Well, it really just allows a user to learn or observe any event in history without fear of ever losing their footing and getting lost throughout time somehow when they do their time travel shenanigans. I can see in your face that you want something a little bit more concrete here, so for example, it enabled Teferi to learn about the next object on this list from his former master Urza, seeing it in use many years before his own birth, and that item is the Sylex. The Sylex, or Sylex, not 100% sure on the pronunciation here, particularly the Golgothian Sylex, is one of the most infamous artifacts in Magic's entire history due to its sheer, unfathomable destructive capability. It's a big bowl that's also a multi-planar nuclear bomb capable of altering the structure of the blind eternities themselves and also cause a multiversal ice age across several planes at the same time. And thank God I didn't use that bowl for my cereal this morning, no matter how good it looks. Boy, that would have gone pretty poorly. Now, what sets the Sylex apart from any other weapon in Magic is not just its power, but its scale and consequence after. Truly, I would say there is just not any other weapon that affects the entire multiverse at scale in a way that the Sylex does. And it's not so much a refined blast, but much more a bomb that just says, screw you to the fabric of existence itself, and as you can guess, when there's a really big bomb, people want to have their own version of it. I wonder what the parallel here is. Later iterations, such as the Filigree Sylex, refine this concept into a more controlled form of destruction, but the core idea kind of remains the same. The Sylex is a tool that converts immense magical energy into a literally world-altering force. TLDR, these bolts are really scary, and so I kind of want to pivot away from the cosmic destruction and get into the nitty-gritty here, the individual weapons that turn their users from planeswalkers or legendary creatures into unbelievably powerful one-man armies, starting with the Archangel Elspeth's blade, Luxior. Luxior, Giada's gift, is a unique artifact weapon tied very closely to the rise of Elspeth Tyrell during the Phyrexian invasion. And unlike many other legendary weapons that are forged through more conventional means, Luxior is deeply connected to Halo, Master Chief, and Cortana. Oh, whoops, my bad. Wrong Halo. Halo, in Magic, is a substance from the plane of New Capenna that possesses natural anti-Phyrexian properties. It's kind of like Tylenol if your pain was actually Elish Norn here, and this makes it one of the few weapons capable of directly countering Phyrexian corruption at a very fundamental level, which is really useful because for some reason the Phyrexians are somehow always trying to invade the multiverse. And in the context of Magic's larger lore, it's the perfect example of a crazy broken weapon sometimes. Like, it's an insane sword, obviously, but compared to other artifacts we've covered on this list, it's the most effective way of killing Phyrexian without, like, nuking the entire rest of the multiverse. But then what about something that is just objectively powerful against literally any enemy, not just the Phyrexian? Well, that leads me now to the Arkbow. The Arkbow is a living weapon carried by Vivian Reed, and I'm just learning about how insanely rad this thing actually is. Rather than dealing direct damage itself, the Arkbow allows its wielder to summon creatures from across planes, effectively acting as a conduit for life and memory. Wait, so it's a summoning bow? That's so cool. A Pokemon bow? What? I want like 3 of these things. Alright, the way this works is actually pretty simple. The bow stores magical imprints of creatures that Vivian has encountered, preserving them as spectral constructs that then can be called into battle. So, I'm just putting an arrow in a quiver and summoning a Tarisk, or maybe a Managorgia Hydra, or perhaps 3 ravenous Gigamolds, or the most fearful creature of all of them, Umbris. Fear Manifest. But the Furby one, because that is objectively more terrifying. Now, in lore terms, the Arkbow represents a different kind of weapon, one that doesn't level entire planes, but instead it kind of makes every single battle an 8v1, and I personally kind of like those odds. The Aetherspark. The Aetherspark is a recent, much more mysterious and abstract artifact representing condensed magical energy tied to the manipulation of ether, the raw magical substance that fuels so much of Avishkar's technology. You might remember that it's the grand prize gifted as part of the very recent Ether Drift race set, right? But what really makes it nuts as an artifact is that it's essentially an artificial planeswalker spark, which is nuts, don't get me wrong, but unfortunately this item was created in the Omen Path era, the era of Magic the Gathering right now we're in, after Realmbreaker created permanent tunnels throughout the multiverse, kind of enabling interplanar travel on a much wider available scale. Still though, the ability to just travel from anywhere in the multiverse whenever you want at any point is a very useful tool. Dude, if only this thing were created 50 years earlier in the story, that thing would have been the center of at least 5 different wars. Instead, it's just a mid-tier artifact that's kind of fun to have in some decks, I guess. Unlike the next artifact, which is an absolute card staple in every single match of Commander that you've ever played. Soul Ring. While the Soul Ring is best known as one of the single most broken and powerful cards in the entire game itself, its presence in the lore is, how do I put this? Not really relevant at all. Unlike many other of the artifacts here, Soul Ring does not have a deeply established narrative history where it's tied to any major events or any other characters, even though it's one of the original Magic cards. But as you've probably noticed, there is no war of the Soul Ring. Instead, the Soul Ring exists more as a representation of a broader concept within Magic, which is basically just harnessing efficient mana. You should run this in every deck, unless, you're part of my play group where someone is actually trying to bribe you with a free pack if you remove Soul Ring from every single deck. But it's a great card. Come on, it's 2 free colorless mana on turn 1. You can get 4 cost creatures out on turn 2 with this thing, or start sifting through your deck with tutors and busting out some insane combos. Dude, the single most disgusting thing I've ever run into in any Magic game is someone going turn 1 land into Soul Ring, into Arcane Signet, into, I think it was Abundant Growth, to basically 6 mana on turn 2 and then just finishing the game on turn 3. Absolutely nasty. So let's now talk about an artifact I kind of wish I had at the table to to whoever did this in that game. The Blackblade. The Blackblade is edgy, it's metal, and it's absolutely awesome. I don't know. Can we do something? No, okay. I first learned about it properly because of the Gideon video we made, but I kind of want to make a video on just this weapon eventually. Again, let me know if that's something you'd like to see for any of these items specifically. It might be really fun. But this blade is heavily tied to the legacy of Dakin Blackblade, its creator. Forged with powerful magic and tied directly to the land itself, the Blackblade grows stronger based on the wielder's connection to the world around them, effectively scaling its power with the environment and the user. And here on the channel, there's nothing we love more than a weapon with no upper limit. That's something I really can get behind. And as you can imagine, for anyone, including Elder Dragon God Nicol Bolas himself, this thing is beyond scary. It can become exponentially more powerful depending on the circumstances, and the wielders who've used it in the past made it absolutely count. Over time, the Blackblade has passed through multiple hands, often leaving a trail of pure destruction in its wake. It's been linked to corruption, ambition, and the amplification of a wielder's darker impulses, reinforcing a reoccurring theme in Magic's lore that powerful artifacts rarely remain purely neutral. Unless Gideon wields it, that man is balance incarnate, and he uses this thing to kill God, literally. No, actually he did not, but he probably could have if he tried, if he was capable of harming Elder Dragons. Yeah, it turns out that Bolas realized, of course, this thing was uber busted and could kill him, so he found it and gave it an enchantment that made it break if it was ever used against an Elder Dragon. Lame. Now the Blackblade is just some metal fragments in the Museum of Ravnica, waiting to be reforged soon. I just kinda hope that the blade doesn't warp around the edges. And you know what? Since we're talking about the concept of warping, that reminds me of another key archetype of artifacts. Very specific artifacts that control more than they harm, warping reality in specific ways, not the big flashy stuff, like in more boring ways, like warping death. The Chain Veil. The Chain Veil is a very dangerous and ancient artifact tied to necromantic magic and the manipulation of spirits. It's of course most famously associated with Liliana Vess, who uses it to greatly enhance her own power at significant personal cost. And let's be real, she kinda looks a little bit weird when she actually wears it. Now the veil functions by drawing on the energy of trapped spirits, particularly the so-called Onake, ogre mages from a long-forgotten era who've cursed this wicked headpiece. And just to be clear, the upper limits of this power are truly nuts. Raising a massive army of undead capable of stalling an actual Eldrazi titan? That is, as you should probably know, a truly insane level of power. And while it does allow the wielder to access immense magical strength beyond their natural limits, bringing them to the power level of pre-mending planeswalkers who for context were nearly cosmic gods, this power is not so freely given. Each use of the Chain Veil extracts a toll, gradually eroding the user's life force and autonomy. Over time, it can begin to influence or even control its wielder, turning them into an extension of its own will. A very much double-edged sword, mask, whatever you want to call it. I think its most notable use was actually completely corrupting Garruk Wildspeaker, tormenting him for years until he came into contact with the next artifact on our list. The Cauldron of Eternity. The Cauldron of Eternity, originating from the plane of Eldraine, is an artifact centered on the manipulation of life, death, and rebirth. It's pretty gnarly. It's a very high-cost mana artifact that you can throw in if you want anything mana cost related. I got it in a deck or two. And that's because it just sort of appears and disrupts the natural order of dying, allowing creatures to return from death repeatedly. However, this process is not clean or controlled, as you can probably imagine. It has a downside. The Cauldron warps those that it restores, often corrupting or altering them in the process. It's kind of like a messed up fusion of the Fountain of Youth and the Holy Grail, but it did do something absolutely nuts, which is free Garruk Wildspeaker from the unyielding chaos of the Chain Veil. Apparently, warping and then corrupting kind of acts like a double negative, and it actually fixed Garruk after he was plagued by the Chain Veil's curse. A glimmer of hope, a ray of sunshine. Sunshine sounds like a perfectly clunky segue into my next artifact, the Immortal Sun. The Immortal Sun is a highly sophisticated artifact designed to restrict planeswalker abilities, which has made it the center point of the greatest war in the history of the multiverse yet, the War of the Spark. But why was it made? Well, initially it was created by Azor, a Sphinx planeswalker, and it was actually intended as a tool to trap powerful beings on the plane of Ixalan. Specifically, it was actually meant to trap Nicol Bolas on Ixalan and was designed by Azor and Ugin, but eventually it fell into the wrong hands. Bolas's hands, ironically. And he used it to try and gobble up everyone's spark during the War of the Spark. Now, the reason it can do that is because Azor's spark is inside of it, actively restricting the planeswalker's greatest tool, mobility. It also generates a ton of heat when it's being used, and apparently if you stand on top of it, the artifact imbues you with godlike power. So it's kind of like a triple threat that ruins a planeswalker's real good time in multiple ways. But it's not the only tool that messes with an individual though, because arguably the even scarier one is our next artifact that I want to chat about and that I like as a Hammer Time and artifact and equipment enjoyer, the Reality Chip. The reality chip represents a more modern, technologically advanced approach to control, and it actually comes from the Japanese-themed Neo-Tokyo-inspired planes of Kamigawa, known for their cybernetic innovations. Now, rather than functioning externally, the chip is designed to interface directly with a host, linking their consciousness to a broader informational and magical network. Once integrated, it allows its user to manipulate systems, predict outcomes, and interact with reality at a highly granular level, or in the game makes you look and use the top card of your library. Now, this effectively turns the wielder into a node within a larger structure capable of processing and influencing complex interactions far beyond regular normal perception. Okay, cool, but why is that so broken, Manu, you might ask now? Well, it's what happened because of this chip that makes it so truly terrifying. Through its use, Elesh Norn, Queen of the Phyrexians, was actually able to develop the ability to complete planeswalkers, including my most precious Tamio here. Completion is the act that Phyrexians use to turn creatures into Phyrexians, gods and mortals alike, but until the reality chip actually entered the equation, that was not applicable to planeswalkers. But with it, even those who deny the multiverse's rules were now unable to escape the Phyrexians' power. Truly horrifying. Dude, imagine having your entire life taken from you. Pretty brutal, but somehow it may not be the greatest form of control in Magic the Gathering still, because that honor probably belongs to the Hedron Network. The Hedron Network is a large-scale artifact system found on the plane of Zendikar, manifesting in the form of these giant floating diamond-shaped hedrons around the entire planet. They are easily one of the most visually stunning parts of any Zendikar-related set, and to find out that they are a prison attached to the magical ley lines of the plane itself was one of those truly standout whoa moments in my personal Magic the Gathering lore quest for this channel. These things were originally created to contain the Eldrazi on Zendikar by Zoran Markov, Ugin, and Nahiri. The Eldrazi are these massive, otherworldly entities that exist beyond conventional understanding. We have a video on them. They consume planes for breakfast, lunch, second breakfast, and even dinner. So they kind of needed to be stopped at this point at all cost, and this caused Nahiri to sacrifice her home plane, turning Zendikar itself into a prison planet for those cosmic horror beings. And really, you probably want to know more about them, how it all went down, and the true power of the Hedron Network. Well, if that's the case, you should check out this video right here, where I really dig deeply into the Eldrazi and their prison. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. Like, subscribe, comment, hype the video. It's annoying to ask, I know, but it does really make a massive difference, especially for a small channel like this. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video, and let me know if you enjoyed a more, like object-focused video like this, which is a little bit different. Bye.